Let's turn today to 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 18. We were considering in our last study about Paul sending Titus to take the offerings from the church in Corinth, not for the ministry of the apostles, but for the poor saints in Jerusalem. And he says in verses 16 and 17 that Titus himself was eager to serve in this way. And along with Titus, Paul says in verse 18, we have sent along with him the brother whose fame in the things of the gospel has spread through all the churches. He doesn't mention the brother's name, but he says the brother's fame in the things of the gospel has spread through all the churches. A good testimony for all to have. One whose life has characterized the good news and recommended it to others. One whose eagerness to spread the gospel to others has been known in all the churches. One who is not seeking his own but the glory of Christ. And not only this, Paul says he's not sending this brother just because of his sterling character, but because he's also been appointed by the churches to travel with us in this gracious work, which is being administered by us for the glory of the Lord himself and to show our readiness. Why does Paul take this precaution of sending a brother with Titus? He says in verse 20, this precaution is being taken so that no one should discredit us in our administration of this generous gift. And there we learn a fundamental principle in the handling of all money connected with the Lord's work. That when it concerns money related to a church or the work of the Lord, it must never be handled by one person alone, however honest he may be, because we must not give room for others to suspect. And therefore, all financial matters, counting, handling of money, must always be done by at least two brothers, and not any two brothers, but two brothers who have a very good testimony in the eyes of others. Notice here how Paul describes these people who are going to handle this money. One brother, he says in verse 18, is one whose fame in the things of the gospel has spread through all the churches. That's part of his qualification to be able to handle finances. And secondly, the churches, verse 19, have also appointed him for this task. In other words, the churches also have confidence in him as one who can handle money. And as far as Titus goes, Paul says, as far as Titus, I can testify, verse 23, he is my partner and fellow worker among you. One who was qualified to be a partner and a fellow worker with the Apostle Paul. And we know that Paul didn't take into his team any brother whom he found. Only if someone measured up to the standards that Paul expected did he take someone onto his team as a partner, and Titus was one like that. And it is not only one more brother that he sends. He goes on to say in verse 22 that he has sent with him another brother whom we have often tested and found diligent in many things, but now even more diligent because of his great confidence in you. So there were three brothers actually, Titus and two other brothers, who went to receive this collection. And it's very significant to notice in this paragraph that all three of them have such an excellent testimony before Paul and before all the churches. Paul has full confidence in them. The churches have full confidence in them. He describes them in verse 23, the last part, as the messengers of the churches and a glory to Christ. It's wonderful if we can have a testimony like that, that our life and our conduct is an honor to Christ. But the point I want to make here is that it is only such people whom Paul permitted to handle finances. The reason we see in verses 20 and 21. He says, we're taking this precaution so that no one should discredit us in the administration of this generous gift. For he says, we have regard for what is honorable, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. It's not enough to say that we are honest in the sight of God, particularly in financial matters. We must not even appear to be dishonest in the sight of men. There must be a clear honesty that men can see in our attitude to money and in our handling of finances, particularly the finances of the church and connected with the Lord's work. If Christians through the ages had followed these simple principles in the handling of finances, there would have been far less of disgrace and dishonor to the Lord's name through the scandals that have spread in so many churches and Christian organizations because of the misappropriation and the mishandling of money. Money is not to be handled by a person merely because he has financial ability. There are many worldly people who have excellent financial ability. Paul is not speaking about the financial ability of these men. He is saying that their lives are a glory to Christ. The churches have confidence in them. He says, I have confidence in these brothers. And in spite of that, I still do not send one of them alone. 3 of them. Paul never believed in having just one person as a treasurer handling money. Always more than one, keeping a check so that other people could not accuse him of anything. And Paul was very careful himself not to touch that himself. For Paul was a target for accusation, being the leader of that team of ministers. He sent others. It's good for those who are called to full-time Christian work not to handle finances themselves. It's good for those who are called to the ministry of the Word, to an apostolic or prophetic or teaching or evangelistic ministry or a shepherding ministry, to concentrate on their ministry and to leave the ministry of handling money to others in the church who do not have the ministry of the Word. It is far better. That is what Paul did, and that is the safe thing for us to do as well. And so he sends these brothers who may not be excellent preachers, but who are excellent Christians. He says in verse 21 a principle that we need to bear in mind, not only in relation to money, but in relation to many other things. He says we have regard for what is honorable, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. In other words, he says, I want to be above reproach, even in the eyes of men. It's not enough for us to say, God knows my heart, and I know I've done the right thing. We have also got to be careful that we don't do anything, either in the financial area, or take, for example, the matter of relationships between the sexes. What an opportunity there is for scandal in this area if a person's not careful. It's not enough for a person to say, my motives are pure and my heart is pure. Here is the principle. We must be above reproach, verse 21, not only in the sight of God, but also in the sight of men. And if we follow this principle, then we shall protect ourselves from disgrace and also the Lord's name from reproach. And having given details about these brothers who are coming to take the collection on behalf of the churches in the Jerusalem area, he says to the Corinthians, therefore, verse 24, openly before the churches, show them the proof of your love and of our reason for boasting about you. He says, I've told these brothers how good and how generous you are, and therefore, he says, give them proof that my boasting was not in vain. And he goes on in chapter 9 to give the example of the churches in Macedonia. Philippi and other places in Macedonia who had given generously. He says it's superfluous, chapter 9, verse 1, for me to write to you about this ministry to the saints. He says it's really unnecessary. I'm sure you are eager to help. I know your readiness, he says. I boasted about you to the Macedonians. I boasted about you to others. That Achaia, that is Corinth, has been prepared since last year, and your zeal has stirred up most of them. He says, I've told the people in Philippi and Macedonia that you are eager to give, and your zeal has stirred them to give. And now I have sent these brethren, he says in verse 3, so that our boasting about you may not be made empty, but that what I have said may be proved before them.